was asked by Jamie to invited to do a talk. I was asked to talk about my work, but also my career, how it all started and everything like that. So I'm just going to jump in a little bit. I was born in '56. I was born in Greenwich. I lived there until I was in kindergarten. My family moved out here to Stanford. I had a regular life as a kid, elementary school, high school. I actually wasn't really introduced to art, contemporary art, until after high school. And let me just step back a little bit. My parents split up when I was 12, and so, can you hear me?
Just a bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it was after high school when I was first introduced to, stumbled upon fine art, contemporary art. And the first two artists that really inspired me were Brancusi. And here's a picture of Constantine Brancusi. One of the things that's significant about him, he actually was an apprentice to Rodin for a small amount of time, until he said, I can't do this anymore. Because his work is, he's one of the very first to really minimize the forms, and simplify and minimize. And an early work of his, there we are, it's a piece called The Kiss. Now this is during the time of Rodin doing The Thinker. So this is very controversial at its time. I loved how minimal it was. Another piece that's very famous of his is Bird in Space. Now, one of the things that's amazing about this piece to me is this was made in 1911. So this is long before people were recognizing this kind of thing. And so his work was very, very controversial, very bold, and influenced me a lot. The next artist that I was very inspired by was Noguchi. And here's a picture of Isamu Noguchi with a piece called Black Sun. It's a beautiful piece. Obviously, it's got complex interrelation of shapes here. If we move on, later in his life, he worked with pieces that had dramatic contrasts of textures and smooth surfaces. And I was always really loved them. Anyway, so let me actually just step back a bit. When I started in the 1970s, might as well look at that one. This was before cell phones. So if you wanted to take a picture of something, it was a camera. You had to get the film developed and all that kind of thing. And so unfortunately, many of these early works, either they're shaky photographs, or I don't have photographs. There's a number of times when I'll point out some event that occurred and I say, I don't have a photograph of it. Anyway, here's a picture back in 1978 of me making one of my first pieces. This is alabaster. It's, here's the finished piece. The title of this piece was The Prophet. Let me actually jump back for a second because it's very difficult to photograph sculpture. Here you're seeing a flat plane and a hole, and where my hand is a depression. That's actually a hole right through the stone there. And what inspired me to make it this title was that I thought it looked somewhat like a portrait, and that hole passing through around its head maybe just think about, thoughts and visions and things like that. And so the title of this was The Prophet. It was purchased by a man who worked for American Can Company. He took it as a gift to the chairman of Daiwa Company Corporation in Tokyo. And so that's where that one ended up. So here's an early picture, black and white, of one of the very first marble pieces I made. Here's the finished piece. This is Carrara marble. The gray part is French marble. This was purchased by a surgeon Saginaw Museum of Art, which is where it is now. And here's an early piece. One of the things you'll note is the compositions are dramatically different. There's not a consistent line set here. This is marble, hand carved, hand polished, very organic shapes. Whoops. This thing that happens. Here's a piece of female torso. It's life size. This is hammered lead sheet. So this started out as a flat sheet of lead, and using ball peen hammer, using it's a if not dying art, a dead art. It's hardly ever done anymore. Anyway, make this way back then. And
Derek,
Yeah.
is that three-dimensional?
Yeah.
well, it is and it isn't. It's hollow, and it's only the front to about here because it's a sheet. So you hammer it that way, turn it, hammer it that way, you know, bang, bang, bang. So it comes around to about here, and so the back is open. So this is a marble piece, a little sort of pre-Columbian or something. I titled it Tinted Bull. Looks kind of like a bull, but he's not mean. He's not mean. Anyway, around this time, I met a man named Ivan Beerbo. And he is one of the sculptors I apprenticed with. I went to 1 year of a fine art school. I went to 2 separate semesters, about 2 years apart. And because I wanted to learn certain things, and I just went off and did that. But I had to do guide courses and things like that. And when I started working with Ivan, he hired me to help him make mannequins for Saks Fifth Avenue. And obviously his work, well, not obviously, but his work is very abstract. This is some photographs from a show he had in Brooklyn many years ago. I was 19 years old. He was in his mid-50s when we first met. So here's some works of his. These are all constructed in wood. These are cityscapes. Just to give you a sense of some of the things he was doing. And then we're going to jump into the 1980s. So the first thing I have there is a studio view. Old, beat up, black and white photograph. It's a studio I had in Old Greenwich at the time. The large disc was installed at Lockwood Matthews Mansion for about 10 years until it deteriorated and had to get removed. It was plaster of Paris. Studio view. I want to not dilly-dally too much because we're running short on time and we've only got started. So I had my first one-person show in 1980. It was at the Carriage Barn in New Canaan and Whately Park. I had become an artist member of the New Canaan Society of the Arts and had a one-person show, and I have a few photographs from that show. So here I am as a young scrap. The piece there is a slab of stone, slab of marble with a drawing carved into it. There's the female torso behind me, actually. Here's another one from that period, from that series. This was a girl named Sue. She broke my heart.
I fixed it for
Different Sue.
him. Different system, still sick.
This is a piece that was in that show. I called it Core Life Form. It reminded me of the core. That piece is at the Bartlett Arboretum in Stanford. There's a piece called Meditation Piece. It's granite. And this piece, these were all in this show. This piece is marble. It has long since been, took some damage and is destroyed. It stood about a little more than 3 feet high. Obviously, you can imagine very tricky to make, but very light, very full of air. I made an enlargement of it. It was also in that show. And then here's a photograph of that in color. That piece lasted about 30 years. It was outdoors. Weathered, it was beautiful, but eventually right, the Art of the Northeast. There is a exhibition that happens at the Silvermine Arts Center every year. I believe we're in our 75th year. It's a juried exhibition, and what that means is that artists enter their work, and someone of significance in the art world juries that work, selects for it to be in the show. This is an extremely competitive show to be in. There's usually about 3,000 entries, and there can be as much as 300 pieces in the show. Frequently, there's more like 50. So highly competitive. People enter their work from Maine to Maryland to Michigan. It's a big deal. This particular year, the juror was a guy named Henry Gelzeller, who was the director of cultural affairs for New York City. Before he was in that position, he was the director of contemporary art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So obviously a person of significance in the art world. This is a picture of the front of the catalog. Here's a picture of Henry. He talks about how he selects work by its success, not its style. Here's a picture of Henry accepting my work for the show. And that piece was titled Stone Flowers. And here's a picture of it. Now this is a significant piece in my life, which you'll find as I progress. So anyway, there's that. Now, another sculptor I started working with was a guy named Reuben Nakian. Reuben Nakian, his work is in the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the National Gallery, all over the place. He was a wonderful man. I was 20, he was 84. I worked directly with him every day. This is a catalog, the cover of the catalog from his one-man show at the Museum of Art in 1966. And here's a photograph of it. Working. Much of his work in his later life was based on Greek mythology. And so this here is a bronze of a running nymph, abstracted. It's probably about 4 feet left to right. It's a decent sized piece. Here's a piece called The Garden of the Gods 1. These pieces are based on sort of the ruins of the Parthenon. This photograph was taken with this piece. It's 18 feet left to right on the roof of the Metropolitan when he had a show at the Met. It now is on loan to the Nassau Museum Sculpture Garden out on Long Island. I worked on that piece. This is a piece called Satyricon 1. It's based on a ancient Greek poem/play. It's in a number of locations in the United States, and there's one in Portugal, in Lisbon. Here's a photograph of me, Reuben, and Eva. In the background are 2 large pieces of stone. So around this time, I was approached by General Foods to make a monumental sculpture, a large one. Here's a photograph of me with a model. So I made the stone piece, which you saw a photograph of. Then I later made a miniature, which is a maquette, a model for a large one. Here's a picture of me with that. Here's a picture of the maquette. Now they had me, I agreed to make that piece 37,000 pounds of marble. So here's one of the blocks as it arrived in my studio. Here's the very beginnings of it. You can see some chips on the ground where I've just gotten started. So I worked on this piece for 13 months. Here's a photograph of it on the truck, ready to make its way down to their site. They installed it at the property they had in Princeton. Here it's being installed. The piece is 20,000 pounds that they're putting in place right there. It's a foundation underground to carry it, similar to a house. And so that's that. Here's a photograph of it completed. And then here's a photograph of it completed. So during this time, I continued to find places to exhibit my work. I entered in a show at the National Academy of Design.
Could you tell me just very briefly about what it's like, how you learned the properties of working with granite and?
Marble this size and things
Yeah,
like
with
that.
did you ever hit it with a chisel and it just fell apart or? Was there
No,
nothing like that?
what actually happened more was that I was using Vermont marble. And one of the things about Vermont marble is periodically you'll come across a piece of quartz. And quartz is really, really hard. It doesn't want to break for anything in this world. And I would come across pieces of quartz that were the size of a football. And so I remember just a week of trying to get this one spot cleared. And a lot of work. I didn't use pneumatic tools, I used electric jackhammers for some of it. I also used some sort of Egyptian techniques of if there was a big corner I knew I was going to take off, instead of spending 3 weeks trying to take it off, I used this process where you drill a bunch of holes, pack wood into those holes, water, and the wood expands and pops the stuff right out. Amazing how it works. Still took me probably a week to make the holes, nonetheless.
Did you save the cutoff?
Pardon me?
Did you save the cutoff?
Yeah. So anyway, interior exhibition at the National Academy of Design. At the time, the National Academy was on Fifth Avenue, just north of the Met. This is a catalog showing a bunch of the members jurying the show. This is one of the shows I don't have a photograph of the piece, but it did happen. Then I entered the Art of the Northeast a couple years later. This particular year, the juror was Linda Scherer, who was a curator from MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. So she accepted my work for this exhibition. This is just pictures of the catalog. That's the piece. Now, one of the things about, I get ahead of myself. So that's the piece that was in the show. This is a piece called Stone and Sun, which also is significant, which we'll get to. Anyway, I then, 2 years after the first time, I entered the National Academy of Design show, got in again, and again, I don't have a photograph of the piece. Here's the catalog. I was given the opportunity to have a solo exhibition at Silver Mountain, and this is the invitation, 1988. This particular composition is the first representation of a piece, sort of a series I keep coming back to. I titled it Duoliths, the concept being it's a singular form made up of two parts. The intention was to have an ancient architectural quality, heavy, massive, ancient. And the space in between the two forms was referred to as negative space in the sculpture world. And my idea, as this composition developed, was that these compositions were a mixture, sort of an intermixing of sort of religious symbols of different cultures of mankind. So some of them might be, Christian symbols and Asian symbols and Egyptian symbols out through, spanning time. And so this, to me, represented mankind. And so the composition has changed multiple times, but it's always got that sort of central theme. Also, the forms being close to each other create what's called dynamic tension, and give you this sense of experiencing the space. So here's a piece that was in that show. It's a duolith-like form. It's sort of Stonehenge-like. And now we venture into the 1990s. I entered the Art of the Northeast again. This time I was accepted by a juror named Susan Brundage, who was the director of the Leo Castelli Gallery. Those of you who know of the Leo Castelli Gallery know they were the cutting-edge, avant-garde representation of fine art back then. They represented Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, at Reinhardt, you can just list them off. You walk into the Museum of Modern Art, look at the paintings on the wall, the Castelli Gallery represented them, and supported their early careers. So, this is just a picture of the catalog. Talks a little bit about Susan Brundage. This is the piece that was in that show. Again, a duolith. In this case, the composition is not actually cut through it, it's indented into it and incised. It's got gold leaf. One of the things about this piece is it's representing mankind in a slightly different way. When I finished this piece, part of completing this piece was I had it outside. And this is back in the 90s when we had a lot of pollution. And so the top surface of this stone is etched, and it's etched by acid rain. And so it's one of the statements here about this. It's the humankind and their reckless foolishness. Anyway. During this time, I also started experimenting with some other materials. I was at Pace Gallery up on 57th one day, and I saw some work from by Louise Nevelson that was cast paper, so that works under glass, and it was a material I had never seen before. I was very intrigued, and I wanted to learn how to work with it. And so here's a piece very early from this period that is cast paper. And one of the things about cast paper that you find, that you contact most of the time, magazines, newspapers, mail, pulp is made out of wood fiber. One of the things about wood fiber-based paper is it's got acid in it. And so they slowly self-destruct, which is why you look at an old piece of newspaper, it's brown and crumpling in your hands. So fine art paper, watercolor paper, print paper, in this particular case, material for cast paper is what's called archival. So it's, in this case, cotton fiber, doesn't have any acid in it, and it will last and last and last, which is why, for example, Michelangelo drawings and Leonardo da Vinci drawings still exist, because they were made with archival paper. Excuse me. So, I learned how to work with this material. It's, you prepare the material to a consistency of something like oatmeal, and using various kinds of mold materials, you can create forms. Now, these are shallow relief or bas relief, you might say. This particular piece is about 4 feet by 5 feet. Took about 6 months to make. It is in the collection of the Housatonic Museum in Bridgeport right now. A duolith, an interlocking duolith. Here's when I was experimenting with some other compositions. These are geometric compositions. Part of the reason I was doing this was I was intrigued by seeing just how precise a reproduction I could get the paper to reproduce. And in some cases, if you're very careful, you can get the cast paper to reproduce a fingerprint. So you can get extremely fine detail if you're tricky, if you work at it. So there's this, there's another one similar, and obviously you're able to paint the surface and get pigments to bleed. In this particular case, I actually pigmented the pulp. So yellow was yellow pulp, and etc. Gives you a different kind of treatment. Jumped ahead too much. Here we are. I was approached by General Electric Corporation. Over the years, General Electric bought a piece of mine at Silver Mine. They bought another piece of mine directly. A number of years later, Jack Welch became the chairman of the board. When he was in that position, General Electric bought NBC. Now, Rockefeller Center was owned by NBC. It was the NBC building. So when General Electric bought it, it became the GE building. And they took the top 2 floors of Rockefeller Center and completely renovated them and put in new office spaces. So they wanted me to make an enlargement of this piece for that space. And so here's the maquette, the model, the bronze. Here's the enlarged piece. There's another photograph of it. Obviously old black and white, the old days. Here it is in the building. One of the last things they did is they were redoing this, beautifully redoing this building, was to have the artwork installed, as you can imagine. So here it is, still on a pallet jack. Here it is installed. A friend of mine, John, who's sitting right back there. We installed this piece in Rockefeller Center, and there's some stories to tell about that experience.
They didn't have the pedestal right.
Now, the pedestal, this is a black lacquer pedestal, so you can't scratch it. And the piece weighs about 1,300 pounds. So as soon as the pedestal arrived, I pushed down on the middle of it, and it just flexed. And I said, I'm gonna put a 1,300 pound thing on this. No. And so in a panic, they had the pedestal go back to Brooklyn somewhere, and they put in some structure, and all back it came. We went out and had a hot dog, waiting for it to come back.
Next day.
Anyway, so this is the piece installed. Here's a view of it where they still haven't removed all the floor protection. When this was installed, Jack Welch was going to arrive in 2 days. So everybody was in a big panic. So here it is, completed. It was in the reception area as you came from the main elevators, you came down the hall, made a right, and the reception area for his offices. Here's another finished view. Now, just to add a little flavor to this, that painting you see on the left is a Mark Rothko. So, I was happy to be hanging hanging with Mark. So, they also purchased another piece, which was put in his office. This is marble. Here's another view of it, back in the black and white days. Here's a finished view in his office. All right, so we're moving on to another project I got involved with. I was approached by the World Food Prize Foundation to create an award. They would give an award to usually a scientist annually. It would be given at the Smithsonian. It was a scientist who had revolutionized food production or distribution or something, some fashion or another. This particular year, it was a man who revolutionized the distribution of milk in India. Before he came along, it wasn't pasteurized, it wasn't homogenized, it was, if you own the cow, you have the milk. And so he revolutionized the distribution of milk, made a huge difference in the population of India. So they would receive a nice fat check, I think it was about $100,000 back in 1989. And the award I created. And so in this case, it's a black granite base, a granite bowl shape, and a bronze fruit form. All right, did that for a number of years, yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned to me at one point that the significance of this in the annual presentation to the winner and who was involved in the presentation. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Well, presidents, senators,
Well, the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State.
Yeah. This is a pretty big deal.
It is a big
Yeah,
deal.
still is,
And it happens at the Rotunda in the Smithsonian. And it was in partnership actually with General Foods at the time. They're one of the sponsors. And they commissioned me to make an enlargement of this for the lobby at their headquarters. And every year they would take that down to the event at the Smithsonian. So I did this for a number of years, and eventually they had a change of leadership. The new leader, head of the organization, was a retired admiral, proposing having this object, recreating the award out of acrylic. And I thought, that's a horrible idea. But anyway, I moved on. So this piece, there we go, I've got a piece that was at the Hammond Museum up in North Salem. This piece is marble. Each vertical is about 700 pounds. It's an interlocking duolith. It was originally, made in South Salem, a place in South Salem. It was originally installed at a private gallery in North Stanton, where it was for a number of years. Then it was installed at a sculpture garden of the Kuros Gallery on 77th Street. They had a sculpture garden in North Salem. It was there for a number of years. Then I was invited by another person who's here, who was on the board, to install it at the Hammond Museum. So I did that. It was there for a number of years, and then recently sold to a collector in Easton. And this is a photograph of it today.
You said Easton?
Yeah.
Is that on the Adams Road?
Yeah.
I think I've seen, I live near there, I drive by it every day, and I'm so pleased to meet you, because I really love this piece.
Oh, good. What am I looking at? Oh, so we're gonna start making changes. So one of the things about this is it's showing events that occurred in my life, but it's also showing changes in design motivations. And so at this time is when PCs came along, and computer-aided design, three-dimensional computer-aided design came into being. And I really wanted to learn about that. And so I started creating compositions using a 3D CAD system. It's a long time ago. And I'm just running through these to see what I was doing at the time. These are warped planes, various kinds of compositions. And this will come back around. So this piece here, years later, I had access to a computer-controlled plasma cutter, which is a computer-controlled machine that operates a plasma cutter. A plasma cutter is a tool that that welders use, things like that. Now, just to give you an idea of what's involved, your oven might operate at 350 degrees. An oxyacetylene cutting torch operates at about 3,500 degrees. A plasma cutter operates at 35,000 degrees.
Wow.
So they are insane. And what it's able to do is similar to a laser. So it will cut right through the metal and give you very, very precise control. And so what I did is I took this composition, got it into the software to be able to drive that machine, and created this piece, which is about 4 feet by 5 feet. It's steel. Obviously this composition is cut through. When looking at the composition, speaking about abstraction, this spoke to me of either a fallen warrior or someone giving birth. And I decided to give homage to Nakian. That photograph I had shown on the cover of his catalog for the show MoMA was a piece called The Birth of Venus. And so that was a very abstracted Birth of Venus. I titled this Birth of Venus. So that's a deviation from the kind of work I've been doing before. Here we are entering the 2000s. I decided to play around with a little bit of figurative work again. So this is plaster of Paris. It's a female torso, a rear view. It was originally made in clay. It's very abstract expressionist. It's very bold and gestural. Heavy textures. Here's a photograph of it being patinaed in bronze. Here I am inspecting it, making some choices about locations of things, colors. Here's a finished view of it in bronze. I made 2 of them. They both are sold. also made another one, a front view. This is the plastered original. And here is the bronze completed. Now, in this particular case, it took me from between when I made the original in clay and plaster and got it cast in bronze, it was 16 years. Finally got it done. I was also very fortunate because I had it cast at a foundry in California. They did a beautiful job of maintaining all these fine textures. And it came back to me ready to be patinaed. I was also fortunate to be able to work with a patina artist who is a famous patina artist. He works at the White House and at the National Gallery. He does beautiful work. And so he did the patina on this. He introduced some cobalt to get the blues and things like that. It's gorgeous. All right, back to the Stone of the Sun. You saw a photograph of this a long time ago in this stuff. This is a maquette. A private collector outside of Minneapolis in Wayzata wanted me to make an enlargement of this for him. He specifically wanted me to use Minnesota limestone. There's a unique limestone. It's the only limestone that exists that's dense enough to take a high polish. And so I had to go to Minnesota and select the stone. And obviously it was winter in Minnesota. I think it was 11 degrees at the time. I had it shipped back out here to a studio I was working in Wilton. Here it is on the truck. Here it is coming off the truck. 7,000 pounds.
Jeez.
Here it is. I've just begun to take the corners off the block. And a few views of the progress of this piece. It's starting to be roughed. A little further along in the roughing. And we're starting to create the composition. I have gone right through it. Foot-and-a-half diameter hole. That's always fun. As Henry Moore said, a hole is a revelation. Here's a semi-finished view. Almost done. Here it's being installed. Now this piece was installed, the collector owns the Philip Johnson house. Philip Johnson, the grandfather of modernist architecture. So this was the Davis house. The house itself is a collector's item. The house itself is a museum piece. And so I had to move a 7,000-pound stone sculpture into this guy's living room. And as you can imagine, we couldn't damage anything. There's 24-inch square travertine floor tile that are 55 years old. And so we did a structural analysis of building. I used a system where this object, it's a system called an air dolly. And it's a system where you've seen people using jackhammers. And there's a big compressor that's towed behind the truck that has hoses to operate those jackhammers. That kind of compressor is out in the driveway. And this piece is taken off the truck and placed on this platform where it basically creates a cushion of air that the object is riding on. So it's kind of like an air hockey puck. And they can move up to 100,000 pounds. And it doesn't touch the ground at all. You can just push it. And so it cost me $4,000 to ship it from here to Minnesota. It cost me $12,000 to get it from the driveway to the living room. Ooh, surprise. Anyway, so here it is in finished install. So that's a Philip Johnson house. You're seeing the central courtyard. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous house. He also, same collector, commissioned me to make a monolith. And here's the plaster original of that. Here is the bronze completed in my studio. And here it is installed at the house. So now we're taking a dramatic turn. 2010s, new decade, bold new work. Whoa! So I started experimenting with all sorts of new materials, bold treatment of color, textures, and I'm going to run through a series of them. And these are just, obviously the forms aren't relating to things I've done in the past, just a change. Now I did do some that are similar to forms from the past, where I'm using color, color and reflection. And then here's another one that's a dramatic deviation from things I've done in the past. This was a lot of fun. It's mostly expanded foam and plant kind of form. You can see these leaf petals with forms coming up from them. I wanted to get forms coming up from them, so I took the entire thing and I hung it from the ceiling, so it was upside down. Anyway, that was a fun piece to make. And some other pieces that, from that period. Here's another monolith, a variation on the monolith theme. Then I started a critter series. I called them critters. So these are geometric forms playing with textures, juxtaposed with organic forms. Did a series of these. This was actually the very first one I did. It's a wonderful piece. It unfortunately is no longer. Every time you move things, they run the risk of getting damaged. So here's a cylindrical form working with these colors. This one is raw, plaster, and just branches. I titled it Out for a Walk with Dad. This is Dad on the right, little Junior on the left. Dad strolling, Junior skipping. This piece is, the metal parts are from a fire suppression system on a 747 jet engine. Got a hold of these strange parts, incorporated them here. I like the juxtaposition between the high-tech forms. It's a piece called Running Critter. It's in bronze. Looks like he's running along. And there's a bronze, highly polished with lacquer enamels. Now, playing with different materials and processes, I got hold of a vacuum forming machine for a while. Vacuum forming is where you take a sheet of plastic, it gets heated over a mold, you generate a vacuum and it pulls the plastic, the molded plastic down to reproduce the mold form. So this is the same composition as one of the cast paper pieces. I used that same mold to achieve this. It's vacuum formed with gold leaf. There's another one that's vacuum formed with gold leaf. Variation on the disc forms I've done. Here's one of the dualists, vacuum formed with gold leaf. And now, at this time, I got involved with the Rosenberg and Company Gallery, 66th Street. It's a picture of the front entrance now. And the piece she had was this one. She had it in a number of exhibitions at the gallery. She also had it in a number of art fairs. So it was in the Southampton Art Fair, it was in the Boca Raton Art Fair, it was in the New York Art Fair, which was quite privileged because they're international art fairs. So there's galleries from Paris, and Tokyo, and London, big deal. In this particular case, she's got it on a pedestal along with a Nokian, because she also represents the Nokian estate. And so she wanted to have it to show the work of Nokian and one of his assistants. And dramatic difference between our work. Now I'm going to sidebar a little bit. Let me just throw in a bit about the Rosenberg Gallery. Back in World War II, when the Nazis were invading Paris, there was a gallery. That gallery represented Van Gogh, Picasso, Degas, Cézanne, Monet, Manet, Matisse, you name it. All of those and that was the Rosenberg gallery. Her great-grandfather, Marianne Rosenberg's great-great-grandfather, owned that gallery. And so when Garrett was moving into town, he could tell, he saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, and managed to smuggle many paintings out of the country, sculptures. And for example, some of the Van Goghs you see anywhere are because of that effort. And so her great-great-grandfather was Alexander, and he managed to save many of them. As you probably heard, Gary came along, decided a whole bunch of them were degenerate art, so he burned them in the street. And then hundreds were stolen, put in trains and disappeared. To this day, Marianne Rosenberg travels the world attempting to reclaim artworks that were her family's artworks, that are her family's artworks. And it's a conflict because many of the people who might own those works now bought them on good faith, not knowing they were stolen in the first place. So in some cases, she has to buy them back. They were stolen from her, she had to buy them back. Which brings me on a little sidebar. When I was working with Nagian, earlier in his career, he got a commission to do a portrait of FDR. It's larger than life, it's about this big, from the neck up. So it's a big piece, it's a beautiful expression, abstract expressionist portraiture. He did FDR and a few of his cabinet members. That piece is in the National Portrait Gallery. When he had that commission, he made two. One of them went to the Portrait Gallery, and the other one disappeared. Disappeared for 40 years or so. And when I was working with Reuben, he was approached by these people who had that piece. They had bought it, not knowing it had ever been stolen. And so they offered it back to him, and he had to buy it back. But it does exist now. It's in North Stamford in a vault, and it's a beautiful piece. Anyway, so right around this time, I'm just throwing this in there, I became a member of the Copley Society of Art in Boston, which is the oldest nonprofit association, art association in the country. 1879, soon it'll be 150 years old. And the piece I had in the new members show of that was this one. This belongs to a collector friend of mine. More new work coming up. Here's a piece. This is actually titled Self-Portrait, so clearly abstract. Dramatic contrast between the form and the pedestal. And then I'm going to run through a few other pieces I did. These are bronze plaques. This is that same composition, actually, portrait. Come back. Whoops, something happened. Where's my cursor? There it is. Big fingers are not helping. Is that working? No, it's.
Yeah.
I'm back. Okay. This piece I titled In Repose, like a maiden leaning on a pillow. It's an abstract sculpture of green repose. This piece is called Idiot Man with Tumor and Crutch. There's a whole story about that title, you might imagine. Has to do with man's foolishness. This piece is actually an abstracted skull, so that piece is titled Mortality. Obviously not cheery topics right now. Here's a piece, an alabaster piece. I have a tape measure there just to give you a sense that it's not all that big. And I titled this one Little Cloud. Kind of looks like a cute little cloud, don't it? This one is alabaster. This belongs to a collector down in Boca Raton. One of the things that's wonderful about this piece is it shows how alabaster is translucent. Many types of alabaster are translucent. And in this case, it's a dual-lith composition. It's actually not a physically two-part form, but with pursuing creating a composition that had a very precise, machined, advanced type of composition in contrast with the naturally occurring textures. And the piece being slightly out of balance. Okay, at the time, I also had a piece installed at the Silverline Arts Center. This piece is, actually, in this photograph, it was temporarily placed, so it's not the best photographs, but it's being installed again soon in a permanent location. I had a show at the Pelham Arts Center. There's a piece that was in their courtyard. And now we're venturing into the 2020s. Once again, I have a dual lift form. It's kind of a cute, fat little thing. And a piece that is alabaster with gold leaf and silver leaf. Very abstract piece. This is the most recent marble piece I've done. Belongs to a collector friend in Easton. And here's another view of it. I refer to it as a hybrid duolith because it has characteristics of the duolith form, with the two forms interrelating with the negative space. All this organic flowing forms that give it a whole different dynamic. And now my most recent work is I've been returning to working with computer-aided design, and I've introduced 3D printing because the 3D printers became remotely affordable. Used to be, it was $500,000 if you wanted a 3D printer. And so now I have some good equipment, and I've started to experiment with new forms, new textures. My goal is to sort of push the technology and see what I can make happen, how I can achieve some of these forms.
What's the material there?
This is what's referred to as PLA, it's polylactic acid. It's a thermoplastic. It's actually biodegradable. And it's sort of the most common material used with film drive printers. Gives me the opportunity to play with textures and forms. You are almost overwhelmed with options with a CAD system. You can do anything, you can defy gravity. I've also taken some of these and cast them in bronze. And then this piece is right there. This is actually a model for a 36-story building. If you look way down in the center, the lower part, that is 10 feet tall. So that's where you would enter the building. All along that lower area is each floor 13 feet. In the CAD design, it's got elevator shafts and things like that. It would be glass, and it might become glass someday. Here I'm working with experimenting with textures, exaggerating the forms. Here I've got a form where I've created entirely out of a lattice. Now this one is a smaller version of that one. So very, very textured. One of the things about CAD forms is that they're geometrically perfect. And so one of the things I've been struggling with and working to achieve is how to introduce a randomness to surfaces. I might as well throw this in. There's a process with the CAD system where you can apply a displacement map, quote unquote. And what that means is you take a black and white photograph of something, and the intensity of the blacks and the intensity of the whites, the software will actually displace the surface. And so in this case, I took pictures of tree bark. I took pictures of melting snow on asphalt to get high contrast blacks and whites and randomness. And then once you've introduced it to the model, you're still able to push the parameters and really exaggerate some things. So that was the case. And And that piece, I was commenting to Jamie, I'd love to see it be about 12 feet tall. Be nice, 12 feet tall. This is a bronze of a bent disc. It's about the size of a hockey puck, so it's a hand piece. It's a lovely piece. This here is actually this right down here. This is as large as I've been able to create 3D prints right now. I'm ready to go. Show it to you so we can actually see it. One of the things about 3D prints is that they're not heavy. It's mostly hollow. It's got a structure inside that gives it strength, but it's not heavy. Anyway,
It's kind of like the General Electric, you know, in the one in Jack Welch's.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Except for it
It's
was
a
white, you know,
yeah, it's a column.
in stone
And heavier.
and heavier.
So these are, you know, once you've created the model as a 3D object, you can have it fabricated, you can scale it to anything you want, and you can have it fabricated in bronze or stainless steel or stone. It's all part of the technology. And then the last image is this one, which is over there. And again, you know, almost floating forms, wonderful textures.
Yeah, you showed us the Brancusi, you know, that was one of your first slides. Flight. Yeah.
The bird in flight. Bird in space is actually the title of it.
Is that natural balance there, or do you have to weight it somehow
No.
on the base?
Natural balance.
Wow.
I have a sense. Because when this is made, it's just, you know, floating in 3D space, you know, it's a virtual concept. And so when I got that angle, I was very happy about getting it. Same thing with the red one. Like I managed to get it so that it stands on its own. Excuse me. So I certainly am open for questions. And you know, in conclusion, what would I say? I'm not done yet. It's a, you know, it's an adventure. It's something that I can't not do. As much as I might get frustrated and say I'm never doing this again, it's not an option. It's like a snowball going down the mountain. You can't stop it. And it's very intriguing to me to continue pushing the envelope of forms and technology methods.
Well, as you said, when you get tired of looking at the computer screen, you go to the other studio and hit the stone.
It's true. Yes, I'm still doing the stone work. Yeah.
When you set this up as a 3D image on the computer, and
Yeah.
generate it with a printer, can they then go to a foundry and be created just with the computer disk that you have and scale it up and
Yes.
in almost any material?
Well, yes, it can be, yes. It actually can be fabricated too. I've done it both ways. With this red piece, because it's got so many planar characteristics, I've taken this form and similar form, not this exact one, and you're able to quote unquote explode it, which makes it so instead of being a solid, it's all these different planes. You're able to then lay them flat, send it off to a laser fabrication place that will cut them to the exact dimensions, and I mean exact, like within 10,000ths of a millimeter. So now you have all the parts, exactly what you need. You're not trying to fit something, it's going to fit. I've done that with some pieces, and then in the case of some forms, the computer file drives a computer-controlled milling machine that you scale it to whatever size you want, and it mills a foam, a pretty dense foam. They come in 3 by 3 by 5 foot chunks. So, for example, if I wanted to make that, it would be fabricated initially out of foam and parts that all fit together, and then those pieces would be cast in bronze in this case, and the piece assembled.
Something like this piece, could that be done, the one you have on the screen? Could that
What I
be
have on the
done in
screen-
stone? And how
It could be done in stone too. With stone, they use a water jet cutting system, a 5-axis water jet cutting system. And so, to rough it, and then a CNC 5-axis milling to refine the surface.
And that would start with a block? Do it
They would
from
start
there?
as a block, one single big block. Now, the thing is this particular form would probably not be really well advised to make it out of stone. Have you been to the PepsiCo collection?
Mm-hmm.
So as you're coming into the property, there's a big white sculpture on the left made out of travertine marble. It's got this big cantilevered form. First time I ever saw it, I said, that's dumb. Because it's in New England. It's gonna get rained on, freeze and thaw, it's going to break. Well, if you go there today, there's a big support holding the part that broke. Because it's stone, you know, you don't make something that's foolish for this, you know, if that piece was in New Mexico, it would probably be fine. But up here in New England where you have freeze and thaw, it's not gonna, especially travertine, because it's got all these cavities to hold the water. So it was a poor choice. Beautiful piece, but, you know, you gotta think about the piece, where it's gonna go.
Or you could do that with bronze.
You could do this in bronze or stainless or aluminum or, you know, yeah, any kind of metal.
Stainless.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Is there, can you cast stainless? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yep.
polished stainless and not, well, that'd be so cool.
Interesting thing about stainless, if you're casting bronze, you use flame, you use gas, it's roaring fire to make it molten. With stainless steel, it's induction. It's an electrical process.
Ah,
And it melts very fast. Much faster than bronze with all the flame.
Mm.
They got a vat of stainless steel and fire up the induction system and boom, molten.
Derek, what's this made of?
Which one? That?
This sphere,
That's wood.
and a single piece or a laid out?
No, that was a single piece, I'm pretty confident. I think Carl was commenting burl.
And you did it, you made
No, no, no.
No,
No, I
that's,
didn't make
yeah.
that. Didn't make that, didn't make this.
the pedestal and the brace.
This one's mine, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got
That's
it.
my plan.
This would be a
Nothing to do with it.
You know, sidebar for you. Got
This
it.
is the most,
Yes, rock,
yeah.
stone, here last.
You've worked in lots of materials. Do you have a favorite that you like to work in?
Well, I think I probably get the most satisfaction from my stone pieces. And, you know, they speak to me the most. They also take it out of you the most, because it's hard work. And you have to, you can imagine, you have to sort of prepare yourself to work on a stone piece, because it's not gonna be done in a week. And it's gonna take time. And sometimes I've worked on a stone piece, it's 2-3 years before I'm done. Some of it's just you get like burnt out, and you have to go do something else for a while. Or sometimes you sort of get to kind of like writer's block, you get to a point where you don't really know where you want to go yet. And it's, you can imagine, it can generate some anxiety where I don't have the experience, I rarely have the experience of, you know, hitting a hammer with a chisel and having a piece I didn't want to have break off.
Right.
Rarely does that happen. But it's more a situation where you're debating the composition and you know that once you've taken it off, you can't put it back on. It's not like clay, where you can change your mind. So you contemplate the composition a lot before you take your step. And then once you've taken the step, you've taken the step.
Have you ever had any like good surprises when you're doing it, like you planned one thing but it came out different?
Certainly. Sometimes they're not good surprises when they happen. Then you study it for a while and you think, oh, this is better. Go, yeah.
How does a sculptor in particular, you, feel about when you're working on a piece of stone that's millions of years old, and
Yeah.
you're gonna go at it and
We've talked about that a bit, yeah. things about working with stone, and it comes into play in my compositions, is obviously it's, well, there's a few factors. One has to do with, I maintain that there's a thing that exists called the continuity of spirit. And in Chinese philosophy, it's called the red thread. The concept with that is that every human, every living being has a red thread connecting us all. I maintain that, from my experience, I feel that that is in all things. So there is a spirit in that stone that is just as real as the spirit that's within me and you, and the chairs, and the carpet, and the lights. Any form, any material, it's this continuity. The other thing about stone is that, and one of the things Carl's leaning toward, I believe, is how you approach it. Because what arrogance I have, thinking I'm going to, in a month or 2 or 3, change this stone to my will. Now, that stone is millions of years old. It's been through a lot to become the stone it is. It's been molded, it's bubbled up through the magma. It's crystallized, it's probably molten again, it's been in an earthquake, and it has this integrity to it. And I find myself, humbled when working with stone, because, you have to have a respect for that stone.
Connecticut is famous for its Marble Valley, and I just wondered if you've ever worked with any Connecticut marble.
Not specifically, no. The most of the marble I've worked with is, though I may have, because some of my very early work was like a piece that was a base from an old headstone, which probably was local. Anyway, the big commission for General Foods was Vermont marble, where I could get these monstrous blocks. And most of the other stone I've ever worked with, I've gotten, has been Italian. Imported Carrara, and or the alabaster is also imported from Italy.
So what's your view of Mount Rushmore these days?
Well, Rushmore. It's funny. I'm a member of the Silvermine Arts Center. I've been a member of the Silvermine Arts Center for 40 years. And one of the founders of Silvermine Arts Center is a guy named Selin Borglum. Selin Borglum was the brother of Gutzon Borglum. And Gutzon Borglum was the guy who did Mount Rushmore. And Selin Borglum is considered to be the better artist. But obviously his brother had a lot of gumption. And one of the very first studio spaces I ever rented, I rented a corner of a building on Studio Road in Stamford, which was Gutzon Borglum's studio. And he did the original models for Mount Rushmore in that studio. Beautiful place. And it's an amazing undertaking, obviously, to do Mount Rushmore. And, people dangling on ropes with jackhammers, and just insane. Really, really amazing work. Yes?
You find it personally less satisfying to be sitting in front of a computer terminal and manipulating the computer as opposed to working directly with the material? And
It's just a very different experience. I do love the hands-on. You have to prepare yourself for it, and you're going to be filthy. Okay, that's the other side. At the end of the day, it's going to be covered with dust, and you're probably going to be bleeding somewhere. But when I'm doing the computer work, it's very intellectual, and it's very freeing, because you really can't do anything. You want to make it big or smaller, twist it around, anything you want. So it allows a lot of freedom of composition, imagining compositions. But the satisfaction of working with this stone piece is very different. It's, takes time, it's very meditative. You can't be in a hurry. You actually have to specifically slow yourself down to get into the pace. And then hammer is your pace. And, yeah. And you're having a conversation with the stone. You absolutely are. Every time. And sometimes you might be saying, please don't break. Please don't break.
You seem to know a lot about Asian influences,
Mhm.
and I read somewhere something about koan ni shigatsu, listening to the request of the stone, and is that something that, it seems like as you're talking,
Yeah.
that you feel that way.
Yes, you definitely, when, it's not at all uncommon for me to get some stone and not touch it for a year. I like to refer to it as having a stare-down contest with the stone. This is really what it's like, I'm looking at it saying. And so, you're imagining how some kind of form, and then you're studying it and saying, well, is it gonna be too tall, is it gonna be too fat, is it not round enough? It's just, you're letting the ideas percolate, and yeah, there's definitely a dialogue with the stone.
How do your ideas come to you? Is there do you find that they come to you at certain times, or do certain things inspire you more than others?
One of the things you might have seen through me showing all of these variations of work over time is I do gravitate towards forms, obviously not so much with the new work, though still in some ways. I gravitate towards forms that have sort of a massive ancientness to them. It's something I love, the contrast, to create compositions that have an ancient quality, like they're 10,000 years old, but I like to then introduce some sort of features or qualities as if they were created by an advanced culture that's long gone. And so one of the things that brings up, as you can imagine, is the concept of the rise and fall of civilizations. And so sometimes these pieces are trying to say something like that. And the spirituality of, this concept of the continuity of spirit, it comes back to me. And so sometimes I want to integrate some kind of symbolism to sort of guide you to think a certain way, think about a certain thing, not guide your thinking, but introduce an idea for people to contemplate. I think many ways stone sculpture, abstract stone sculpture, is sort of a meditative experience. Especially, when it's minimal abstraction, you're studying it saying, okay, what is this thing? Why does it move me? Why, what is it that causes me to gravitate toward this thing and be moved by it? So where do the ideas come from? I don't know. They just come. And it's a constant thing, and it's sometimes they just sort of coalesce, at which point you say, all right, it's time to get started. Or it's time to continue if you've come to a block.
Also, I'm sure if you have a contest, which I don't know how often you're doing that, but, if you want to enter something, even though it might take a really long time to make a stone sculpture, but you might be motivated by that too.
Yeah,
to enter
I
something.
try to avoid that. I try to avoid being pressured to finish something.
Okay.
Because I think it's more important, quite honestly, I think it's more important to maintain the integrity of the object as opposed to meet somebody's deadline.
Okay.
Admittedly, if I had a one-man show at MoMA coming up, I'd be motivated. And they had to be focused.
Yeah, that would.
But yeah, it's a meditative thing I do, working in stone. And yeah, sometimes I work in stone for a while and I have to get away from it. I'm very fortunate I can come do other things. It's part of the reason why I have an interest in so many different materials. It's because when I get to a sort of a, writer's block kind of experience, I say, all right, I'm gonna leave you for a month. Go do something else. And get involved in this, and move back to that. Or for example, the cast paper piece, it took me 5 months. What am I doing during that 5 months? I'm waiting. So, let's do something else. You know, you have to wait for it to dry.
The gentleman that talked earlier about, you know, working on the computer, more mind, I guess, and then working with your hands and mind in hand. How about the tools that you use when you're doing it?
Doing the stonework?
The stonework, is there any particular feeling you have about it, or have you learned anything about a particular piece that you thought would do something and then do something else? I'm just thinking from the craftsmanship of it.
I prefer using the hammer and chisel to power tools. I think you're getting a whole lot more feel for what you're doing. There are times, if I'm working on a large piece, I will use pneumatic tools, power tools, just because it's a very big piece. I like texture. So there's the variety of tools you use when you're working with stone. The first one is a point. It's called a point, and it's a chisel that comes to a point. And it's what you use to take off bulky material. It's called roughing. So you're taking away things you know are going to be gone, getting close to where the surface is that you want. And then you're using various other kinds of tools, toothed tools, and then either flat chisels, or there's a particular kind of chisel that's it's kind of like a flat chisel. It's got a curved blade, where you're refining the surface more and more to just the point where you final finish. I love using the point. I actually will challenge myself sometimes to use the point as much as I can to get the refinement, as opposed to using the tooth chisels. To try to get it, just really get down to it, to keep this texture going on. I think the surface is much more alive.
And one of the reasons why I asked the question, I see the circle or the cylinder or the negative space of the cylinder, it looks like a perfect 360 to me sometimes. When I'm observing it on the computer, I can see how you can do it.
Yeah.
When you're doing it by hand with those instruments, it's so precise.
It's tricky. Takes a lot of work. Some of this is machined as opposed to hand carved. So I was changing the process to make it so that it, you know, the idea of it being created by an advanced sculptor is a machining process with jigs and routers. It's scary. That's the other part of it. When you're doing it, you know, with power tools, but by hand as opposed to a machine. You know, you can stand over here and it's not going to hurt you. In some of these pieces, and then another one I had a photograph of. Yeah, you're using a carbide tip tools with a router, and if it gets away from you, hopefully you're not in the way, because you will bleed a lot. Which I don't like. I don't like bleeding. Not my favorite thing. But the piece I'm working on right now is very organic, as opposed to some of these ancient massive disc forms or dualith forms. It's inspired by a vertebrate form. So it's this really organic, undulating form. And I'm challenging myself to see how successful I can be. And so far it's behaving. Well, thank you.